Dr. Michael Mann, look at that. Look who we've got. One of the greatest. Always good to see you, sir. Thank you very much for joining me. We're going to talk about the big climate conference that just wrapped up, your feelings on it, and anything else we can get to. How are you? Happy Thanksgiving Eve we're talking on.
Yeah, same to you, my friend. It's great to be with you. Yeah, there's a lot going on. Trying to, it's sort of, would have been nice going into the holidays with a win in Brazil, COP30, but there was a lot of disappointment. We can get into that.
Did you at any point think that the outcome was going to be different on the way in? Did you have higher hopes?
Yeah, I hoped that that the UN would show some resolve. In particular, this idea of consensus, that we have to have consensus among all of the countries of the world to agree to anything, when that means you've got to get Saudi Arabia and Russia, the leading petrostates who have done everything they can to block progress. You essentially give them a veto power. And in my view, stop calling consensus, equating consensus with unanimity. That's not what it means. We don't need Saudi Arabia and Russia to be on board if all of the other countries of the world are.
But they have so much power when it comes to, and obviously the U.S. too, right? We're not on board either.
Yeah, as I've pointed out, under Trump and Republican rule right now, the United States is part of that, what I call the coalition of the unwilling. This coalition of petrostates that not only refuse to do anything on climate, but have actively worked to block progress globally.
Right. Let me read from our friends over at Democracy Now! Who talk about the conclusion of COP30. Global negotiations at the annual UN Climate Summit ended Saturday in Belém, Brazil, with a watered-down agreement that does not even mention fossil fuels, let alone offer a roadmap to phase out what are the primary contributors to the climate crisis. The COP30 agreement also makes no new commitments to halt deforestation and does not address global meat consumption, another major driver of global warming. That's how Democracy put it. You wrote all about it as well, but let's just dig into it a little bit.
Yeah.
First of all, is there anything that's so much different that has changed over the past few conferences in terms of the fact that there's all these fossil fuel lobbyists there? Who are they? Why are they there?
Yeah.
Were they not used to be there?
Yeah. It's the Democracy Now! Summary, I think is quite apt. And, this idea that we're not going to talk about fossil fuels. It's like going to your doctor, right? Your annual checkup. And he's, Pete, you gotta, you're not a young man anymore. You gotta get healthy. He says, that's fine, doctor, but I don't want to talk about diet or exercise. Everything else is on the table, but we're not talking diet and exercise. It's sort of like that, right? It's the elephant in the room, fossil fuels. We've got to get off fossil. It's not that hard. As I like to say, when you find yourself in a climate hole, stop digging and burning fossil fuels. And that's what we're still doing. And the idea that isn't on the agenda, an agreement to phase out fossil fuels, sort of invalidates the conference at the start. And so we need to see, and I've written about this before, and I think you're exactly right, with each additional failed COP, and there was a good COP, if we can call it that, back at COP26. There were agreements by countries to make meaningful reductions in carbon emissions. There wasn't, an agreement to a timetable for phase out, but there was an agreement to make substantial, to take substantial actions. Each country made a commitment to lower its carbon emissions, and if all of those commitments were honored, it would actually get us on the path that we need to be on. So the problem isn't that the countries of the world aren't willing to sort of come to the table and make commitments. The problem is there's no real way to enforce that right now without a timetable. And what we've seen is that there's this huge implementation gap, as we call it, this gap between where we should be based on all of the commitments that all the countries of the world have made and the trajectory that we're actually on, which well exceeds that.
Just going back to one thing you mentioned, it's so important that, and it's so frustrating to talk, use the analogy about someone's health. You go into the doctor, and if it's my case, the doctor would say, you look like a perfect specimen to me, whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I know. We both get that. It's just who we are. But yeah.
But enough with the drinking. Look at your skin, sir. But the point is, if you don't get to the root of the problem, then what are we doing? I'm reminded of some Republican committee taking a look at climate change and striking the words greenhouse gases, and they're doing that now throughout their federal funding. They're acting like the primary cause of the problem. We're not even allowed to talk about it. The words and that kind of censorship is, talk a little bit about that. You've written books about this, but you're censoring science. I think you might be familiar with the phrase. And it just sucks because I don't know much about science, but we do know the consensus around fossil fuels being the primary cause of what we are seeing with the climate. And if we don't talk about that, then how can we even begin to solve the problem? That's not like that with a lot of other issues. I'm reminded of the financial crisis. We're not allowed to talk about certain banking things, of the credit default swaps. But talk to me about censoring science and how we're still doing it.
Sure thing. And some time ago, Peter Hotez and I came on, talked with you about our new book, gratuitous of me to mention, Science Under Siege, right? And we began writing this book 2 years ago. So we had no idea that it would come out in this environment where, science is under siege in a way we couldn't have possibly imagined. And that's true on vaccines and public health science, and that's Peter's area of expertise. But relevant to our conversation here, that's clearly true when it comes to climate. The current, administration, the Trump administration, appointing science deniers, climate deniers, fossil fuel lobbyists to all the key cabinet positions, and a Republican Congress that's just a rubber stamp on whatever Trump is doing. It is the implementation of what they told us they would do. That's the irony, right? Project 2025. They laid out their vision, and we shouldn't be surprised. They are implementing it. And it is no less than a dismantling of all of the environmental progress made over half a century by Republican as well as Democratic administrations, a dismantling of that over a time frame of just a year or two, and disengagement from all of our global commitments. Obviously, the U.S. not even having a delegation at COP30 speaks to the fact that they have no interest in working with the other nations of the world to address this problem, because this is an administration that is run now by fossil fuel interests who have only one thing in mind: maximizing their profits at the expense of people on the planet.
Well, at least Gavin Newsom was there. He's the governor of one of the most populated states.
That's right.
And more populated than a lot of countries that were there.
I think he was making a statement, right? And we'll see a presidential run from him. And just imagine a Newsom administration. This is what I tell people. Things can change dramatically and rapidly. Even in the off-term election, we saw some sense of that the winds are shifting. And so it's not too late. That's important for people, who come away from COP30 dejected. We didn't make any progress. Yes, it was a huge failure, but it's not the end of the road.
Talk to me about where we are at now. Not the end of the road, but what does the science say? What are you looking at? What are you worried about? Look at the rainforest. We can look at the ocean currents. We can look at the ice caps and so many other things we can study.
Yeah. And so, using that road analogy, we are going down this dangerous road, and we may have missed the 1.5 C, 3 degree Fahrenheit exit. That window of opportunity may have closed. I think we needed to see more progress at COP30 for that to be a possibility. So we will overshoot that. But 1.6, that's a better exit to take than 1.7, and that's a better exit to take than 1.8. So we need to get off the highway as soon as we can. And it isn't like a cliff where the climate just blows up. Things get worse and worse, and we're seeing that, right? I mean, we are seeing the consequences of climate inaction thus far in the form of these unprecedented, extreme weather disasters and coastal inundation. You turn on your television, read your newspaper headlines. we're seeing the impacts. And the question is, how bad are we willing to let it get? Whether it's passing possible tipping points where large parts of the ice sheets, undergo collapse. And we're talking not feet, but meters of sea level rise over, the next several decades. All of that is on the table. All of that is possible if we don't take action.
What was Bill Gates? How has he been involved? You write about him. Everybody's talking about. He sidetracked the conversation going into COP30. You write by dismissing the urgency of climate mitigation. What is he? I thought he was on the forefront of fighting for and funding and help funding research on the climate crisis for a long time.
Yeah. So that's a misconception. It was interesting to me because a lot of people are like, whoa, it's a pivot by Bill Gates. He was a climate hero. Those of us who've been following him and his messaging for years know better. I've been criticizing him for more than a decade because what he has, the approach that he's taken is actually to downplay the viability of a clean energy transition. And so instead, he's invested and talked up and invested personally at the same time in nuclear technology that's unlikely to pay off. Carbon capture and geoengineering will shoot particles into the stratosphere to block out the sun. That's how we're going to deal with the global warming problem. It almost sounds like a Simpson episode, and it actually was. And so, right, he, as I like to say, if your only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If your only tool is like techno fixes to problems, like patches to the awful Windows 95 operating system that was so virus that's the world that Bill Gates comes from. And he's looking at this as we just need to put a patch on this global operating system. And as I said in my commentary, if you crash the planet, you can't reboot it, Bill.
Talk about China, what they're doing differently, because it would seem that they are leading on renewable energy. And the reason for that is not because necessarily pollution or climate, but because it seems to make sense. It seems to be a sound investment. And yeah, there's less pollution in China and elsewhere. But what there seems to be a lot of talk about what they're investing in terms of their grid, in terms of vehicles and the rest. They still obviously have coal-fired plants, though.
Yeah, as I've written about this sense that we're seeing sort of a rise of the East now when it comes to climate leadership. China, of course, leading the way there. They are, as you say, investing far more in renewable energy, solar, wind, making that technology available to the rest of the world, lowering the price of solar panels. They're doing all those things, and that's great. But at the same time, they're sort of still talking out of both sides of their mouth. They were not especially helpful at COP30. They were not one of the countries, for example, there were 80 countries that said, we want to commit right now to a fossil fuel phase out, to phasing out fossil fuels on some agreed upon timeline. And China was not part of that. Obviously, Saudi Arabia, Russia, the United States, they are petrostates now. The U.S. is now one of those petrostates as part of that alliance. We didn't expect them to support it, but some of us might have expected China to support a phase-out agreement, and they didn't do that. So they're still hedging their bets. I think to some extent, they want to see a little more progress on the part of the West. If the United States disengages, China can easily make the argument, hey, you're the world's biggest legacy carbon polluter. You've put more carbon pollution into the atmosphere than any other country. You've caused more warming and climate damage than any other country. If you're not doing your part, why should we? Shouldn't we have access to cheap fossil fuel energy to continue to build our growing economy?
When it comes to climate science and the consensus, have things been happening faster than predicted by scientists like you and others and the whole panels, the consensus, or have some predictions been wrong and they're happening slower? Is that also a stupid question?
No, it's a great question. I'll tell you, I'm already thinking about the next book that I'm going to write, and it'll probably be, I'm working with the title, The Truth is Bad Enough. It was something that my good friend and mentor Steve Schneider said decades ago when talking about the climate crisis. The truth is bad enough. We don't have to exaggerate it, especially when that exaggeration can foment doom and despair, right? Like, oh my God, it's so huge of a problem. There's nothing we can do about it. And it's unstoppable. We're seeing runaway feedbacks. All humanity is going to be dead in 10 years. There are some protagonists out there making that argument, and they have large followings. That it's too late to do anything. And we've talked about this. You and I have talked about the danger of doomism here. And so we have to be truthful to what the science says. And I always, come down on this idea of conveying both urgency. That's critical because we're seeing worse and worse damage with every fraction of a degree of warming. There's the urgency, but the agency. It's not too late to do something about it. And the truth is bad enough. When you look at the warming of the planet, it's right in line with the predictions. Most people don't realize that. The warming that we've seen is almost exactly what scientists decades ago predicted we would see if we followed the pathway of fossil fuel burning that we followed. Even ExxonMobil's own scientists, before they were fired, predicted where we would be pretty accurately. Now, I think what you're getting at, and this is true, some of the consequences of that warming are actually exceeding what we predicted, because there are processes that are important in ice sheet collapse that weren't in our models. And what we're seeing is the ice sheets are more dynamic than our models had them being, say, a decade and a half ago. They can collapse faster than we thought. The extreme weather events, and some of my own research involves factors that are behind these very persistent summer weather extremes, these heat domes, these persistent heat waves and droughts and wildfires and floods. The models are likely missing one important mechanism behind that. And so if anything, when it comes to the impacts of the warming, the models may be underestimating some of those impacts. And that means there's even great urgency. But as far as the warming of the planet is concerned, it's warmed exactly what we predicted, and what the models tell us, it will continue to warm as long as we continue to emit carbon into the atmosphere. We've got to stop doing that.
You are probably one of the best people to talk about this next issue and subject, which is the conversation about the climate crisis and where is it? You've been in it for your whole career. I've been in it for much of my career, most of my career.
Yeah.
And now you've gone from Penn State.
It's like, what, 70 years, Pete?
Yeah. I've been, by the way, one of the anxieties I have around hanging out with my dad is, my dad's 80 and I'm going to see him tomorrow. We look exactly the same. I'm 50 and he's 80, and you cannot tell the difference. I
hear you. My dad's 91. The same
boat. Yeah. Do you guys look alike? We got to exchange pictures of our dads. So anyway, the question is, you're now at UPenn Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media. How has the conversation changed? I feel like, without any data in front of me, but you can chart these things, how many mentions something gets in mainstream media and so on. You can see where resources and funding are going, and you could just take to general temperature, zeitgeist. Where is the protest movement in the streets? What is Bill McKibben doing insane, et cetera? And so I feel like, because of the daily barrage of crazy that comes with our commander in chief, everything else falls by the wayside because of the hot air that he generates constantly, and the controversy, the scandals, and the real important decisions the Supreme Court is making. What does the data say? Where is the conversation? What can we do better?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I think you've summarized it in a way I haven't heard anybody else do so effectively, which is there's this crowding out in the news cycle. All of this, mayhem and just sort of the crazy, as you say, has crowded out the space for the more nuanced, serious conversations that we have to have about the leading, challenges we face. And this is the thesis of this, our book, my book with Peter, that, we've got these existential crises, pandemics that are growing worse in part because of climate change, the climate crisis, and then the sort of the mass spread, the viral spread of misinformation and disinformation, which is the biggest problem of all because it makes it impossible to tackle any of these other problems, and it crowds out. It's exactly as you say. It's crowding out the space. It's hard to get on a network news program anymore to talk about climate. It only happens when there's some disaster, like the last time I did a round of media interviews on national media. With national media venues was with the Hurricane Melissa when it struck, and that's what, more than a month ago.
It's crazy that when you see a hurricane, you realize how it's going to affect your personal schedule. Like, I'm going to get calls. I'm going to get calls to join, but it's also crazy that has to be the case. We've got to find better ways, and all do better, including myself, to make sure we slot in segments to make sure we keep people aware of this. Because in the end, what we're talking about here is also a public health crisis, but so is concerns that the CDC is being run by sorcerers and witches and grifters. More importantly, I didn't mean to disrespect sorcerers and witches, because grifters. And so when we're talking to our friend Peter Hotez, you're over here talking about climate change, and which is a longer term consequences. You don't see the public health crisis as much, more likely affects marginalized communities, which is true of every public health crisis. But Peter is over here trying to be like, no, you can take aspirin. Like, the fact that we have a conversation about Tylenol, we so often don't get to talk about the actual root of a problem, and we're distracted.
That's exactly right, Pete. And it's because there's this concerted effort to confuse the public discourse, to confuse the public, to throw so much mud on the wall that Peter and I spend all of our time trying to scrape the mud off the wall. And we don't have time. We have to be aware of that tactic, and there are effective ways to deal with it. But even in the climate space, the conspiracy theories about chemtrails and Lee
Zeldin, the head of the EPA, made an announcement. I played it on the show. He's going to look into contrails or something.
Yeah, well, they're going to, and they're releasing, the FBI, you probably saw the other day, is releasing a classified report on Bigfoot.
Well, that I find important. I think that's something they do.
Well, it provides some hope that they'll then release that report, those Epstein papers too. So, but we'll see about that.
That'd be great if they were inflated somehow. It turned out Bigfoot was actually being sexually trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein. Crazy.
I think that is part of the QAnon theory, actually.
It's not. It's actually not. Unfortunately, comedy's dead, because wait, is that real? No, it's not. Wait, maybe it is. I don't know.
You're right.
Yeah. So the attention being paid to the issue is something that we really need to try to do a better job at, but you have to be able to also monetize things and make a career out of things. And it's like, if we don't label our conversation today, Pete Dominick destroys Michael Mann in a competition of baldness, people might not watch.
Yeah, actually, as a fundraiser, you might have something there. But I can think of a few other colleagues we could probably invite, maybe a panel of 5.
Sure, a panel of balds. You don't know our struggle. So, in the conclusion, sir, I am so grateful whenever you join us. What about the current political conversation in America around climate? What about the current legislation or judicial conclusions or the Supreme Court seems to decide on so much of what might go through the legislative branch. What are you kind of paying attention to? Is there any asks, any pressure that could be put on Congress in any way, given the state of our politics?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I would just say, look at the off-term elections. What it shows is that people are mobilized. People are angry. They're upset. They're beginning to understand just how much damage this current administration and Republican the administration, with support from the Republican Congress and a Republican stacked, Supreme Court. We're seeing how much damage can be done when the right has a stranglehold on our politics and no obstacles to implementing their agenda, their anti-science driven agenda. And so the solution, there's no way around it. We've got to turn out. We've got to mobilize and turn people out in huge numbers in these midterm elections to begin to right this ship. If we want to restore the rightful role of science, and public health, in addressing the existential climate crisis. If we want to make any progress there in this country, and that's critical to the global effort, right? If the U.S. doesn't show leadership, there's a tendency for other countries to fail to do so as well. So we've got to turn out in mass numbers in elections and vote for politicians who will do right by us, rather than politicians who are just a rubber stamp for polluters and bad actors.
If it's great, well said, but if the politics of the day seem to be affordability, word from Mamdani, Trump loved it. He's like, I should try that.
It's pretty good, actually.
It's a pretty good platform to run on when it comes to the affordability of energy.
Yeah,
I think that's the only thing that seems to matter to move people towards a cleaner. People don't care, and I'm fine with this argument, because if you're not going to agree with the moral argument about every critter and creature, including the future ones that you might be related to and share blood with, then fine. It's cheaper and better to have.
That's right. Yeah,
so,
I mean, you put your finger on it, Pete. If people could understand that a major factor that's driving up energy prices right now is the fact that the administration has canceled all of this, cheap renewable energy, new sources of renewable energy, and even existing renewable energy. So we have this cheap, clean source of energy, and if we were embracing it, if we were continuing with the policies of the last administration, we would be on a trajectory where energy prices get lower and our environment benefits from it. But instead, they are blocking wind, they're blocking solar, they're doing everything they can to kill the renewable energy industry in this country, and it's driving up prices.
And at the same time, they're investing in coal and steam and feelings and things that don't work and pollute. And obviously in oil, they're going to drill off of California and the Arctic Wildlife Refuge and in Florida, although Florida's Republicans are not having it. I just heard yesterday, not in their backyard, but at the same time, they're disinvesting in the future while the rest of the world is investing. They're investing in the past to create more demand for, but regardless of markets and subsidies, it would still seem, my understanding is that solar is very competitive now with natural gas and other forms of electricity.
It's cheaper on a levelized basis. And the only reason that, we're not seeing faster movement towards those sources of energy is because of an administration that's providing all sorts of subsidies, direct and indirect, for fossil fuels, and they're blocking. The irony here is, if they just kept their hands off the market, as they claim they like to do, the free market, they support the free market. If we had a free market, we would be moving even more dramatically towards clean energy.
Nothing. Every time you hear a right winger criticize Democrats or liberals, calling them socialists or communists, I've said this forever. I'm like, well, you're not a capitalist. You don't support capitalism. And let's just talk about energy. We don't have to talk about healthcare or any other industry that gets subsidized or that government picks winners, which is what they do in the rest of the world. But let's just talk about energy. And if the free market were allowed to compete without all the subsidies, without all the investments and so on, at this point, well, we wouldn't have any of it if the government wasn't investing in research, which they're also not investing in.
Well,
but
that's
if it were a more level playing field,
exactly,
you would see that you're not a capitalist. You're not because energy is part of the price of fucking everything.
Wait, you're saying that they're hypocrites, Pete?
No, I don't even do that anymore. I'm not even like, because I don't appeal to shame anymore. I still put shame aside, put humiliation aside. I still think sometimes people could be logical and reasonable about something. It's like, listen, argue for capitalism, go ahead, but don't act like that's what this has ever been. We're always paying less at the pump.
I agree. I mean, if we could have a good faith conversation about all this, then I think that's a compelling argument that would win people over. I think that right now, people are so balkanized that it's very difficult. Very difficult to have this.
I'm is like, drive my fucking electric car, drive it around.
There you are.
Look at my home energy prices. Like, just sell it, proselytize the stuff. I've had solar panels and EVs for the longest, longer than everybody, and nobody cares. Everybody just I've tried to be the change I want to see, but my neighbors are like, those are ugly. All right.
Well, it does actually make a difference. I mean, there are studies that show that what your neighbors are doing, when it comes to clean energy choices,
I'm on the radio. I
What's
did it
that?
because I'm on the radio. I did it because I'm on the radio. If I'm talking to you and other activists and I call myself an activist, I can't then be selling, ads on my show for petroleum. And I can't then, most importantly, in my life, be driving an F-150. I love pickup trucks, but I can't, be sucking gas all over the place. But I do still
You
eat
got to
animals.
choose your vices. In your case, it's all those steaks that you eat, right?
I eat way too many birds and animals, and so that didn't come up. They said at Democracy Now. How much of an issue is that? Now I'll let you go. The eating of the animals. Is anybody doing anything about that anywhere?
What I would say is like shaming people over their dietary choices, their food choices, backfires, and there's a lot of research that shows that. What we can do is like make healthy choices ourselves. Create a good example for other people. Like, hey, I've changed my diet. I'm eating much less red meat. I feel great about it. Sort of make the positive case. And again, government incentives that help people make healthier choices for them and for the planet at the same time.
You're the greatest. You're talking about the climate crisis with the best person to talk about it with, Dr. Michael Mann. Always appreciate when you join me. Everybody should go get his new book he wrote with our friend Peter Hotez, michaelmann.net. Is that your website?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought,
yeah.
I was like, wait, this is your website that I'm reading.
No, it's the other Michael, the director. Make sure you don't go to the director.
Have you guys ever met?
No, we haven't. But as I try to explain to people, he directed Heat, but I predicted it.
Oh, look at you.
Yeah.
Look at you.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for watching live, everybody. I'm going to hit end and we'll talk to y'all later.